Hey, good afternoon, everybody. So, I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago called Jeff Slate, Paul Simon. And that column actually got a little bit of a little bit of traction, pardon me. I've heard from several readers who had pretty good comments and observations about it. And it's one of those kind of things where I thought long and hard about whether I wanted to actually write the column because do you want to give more attention to an obviously attention seeking knucklehead? Now, this fella, Jeff Slate, describes himself as a musician and a writer and music critic in New York, living in New York City. And he writes for the New York Times. And the particular article that caught my attention was on the NBC News website. And it was basically just a horrendous rundown of Paul Simon. And then, sort of to add some more cars onto the slag train, he dragged Joni Mitchell and Bruce Springsteen and Neil Young and some others into it. And basically, the central conceit of this column is that 200 years from now, the only musical artist that anybody's going to remember or consider significant of the latter half of the 20th and presumably the first part of the 21st century are the Beatles and Bob Dylan. Now, the Beatles and Bob Dylan are awesome. They're just fine. I'm not a huge fan of Bob Dylan, but I recognize his genius. He's an incredible performer. He writes incredible lyrics. The guy is just on fire, and he deserves every accolade he's ever gotten and is ever going to get. The Beatles, I mean, say no more. They didn't invent pop music, but they sure refined it. I mean, they put it on steroids. And for guys that didn't have a lot of formal training, they did some pretty sophisticated things, both lyrically and musically. So I think their genius is widely acknowledged, and I do think that they'll be relevant in the future. But for some reason, and I think it has to be based on personal animus, or one reader pointed out, he might have just wanted to get people talking about him, and he sort of picked a convenient target, was Paul Simon. Now, Paul Simon, like a lot of artists of my day, who were popular in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, are now starting to sell their catalogs as they're getting close to the end of their life. And the reasons for this are complex, but it's probably a smart move on their part financially to do it because they're taking money right now for sure. You can't take that money with you, so you might as well get the money at the end of your life, but you can enjoy it yourself or figure out where you want it to go. And, betting, and the people who are buying these rights are betting on the fact that they're going to make a fortune on down the road owning the exclusive rights to these songs, the catalogs of these artists. That's less of a certain bet. Who knows? I mean, it's hard to account for tastes. In the short run, it seems like a prudent decision to make, but who knows in the long run? But anyway, the reasons for this are complex. And, a lot of people go sell out. Now I'm going to see my favorite Beatles song on a beer commercial or my favorite, you're not likely to see that, but maybe my favorite Paul Simon song or something like that on a beer commercial, something I don't want. Well, that's just the way it goes. Those are artists. They have a right to do what they want with their catalog. I take a dimmer view of that when the artists never owned their catalog in the first place, when they were part of some shotgun marriage with a publishing company a long time ago when they were young and vulnerable, and they still don't have the rights to their catalog. Taylor Swift just went through a very well publicized episode where she actually is going back now and re-recording lots of her catalog so that she owns the rights to the re-recorded works. I'm not a fan of Taylor Swift musically because I'm just not into that kind of stuff, but I think that as an artist who stands up for herself and other artists, hats off to you, Miss Swift. You're doing a wonderful job. But anyway, this guy Jeff Slate just really lays into Paul Simon, and he lays into a lot of other artists too of that era, Bruce Springsteen, and then very curiously, Joni Mitchell and Neil Young. And I don't get any of it. He talks about how none of them are going to be relevant 200 years from now. It's just going to be the Beatles and Bob Dylan. And these people are basically, just sort of afterthoughts in the future. They just won't be relevant at all. Now, I have a couple of reactions to that, and I wrote about both these in the column. First of all, no one knows what's going to be relevant 200 years down the road, 2 centuries in the future. It's within the realm of possibility that Mr. Slate is entirely correct. Those are the only two people of this era in our cultural history that anybody remembers 2 centuries from now. It is equally within the realm of possibility that no one knows. Right now, there is an artist out there somewhere, or artists, that really nobody knows about, who are all the rage 200 years from now. Classical music is full of references to people like that, people who are basically anonymous in their lifetime, who were discovered 50, 60, 100 years, 200 years after their deaths. They're all the rage right now in classical music. Jazz is a little bit that way too. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, equally within the realm of possibility. Yeah, it takes a fair amount of arrogance to claim that you and you alone possess this special knowledge about what's going to be relevant 2 centuries in the future. Wish I could see that far ahead. I wish I could see in the next week sometime. But anyway, so, it's bad enough that he puts these two artists, the Beatles and Bob Dylan, on this island. Now, I think they will be relevant in the future. Again, don't get me wrong. I like the Beatles and I like Bob Dylan. But, Bruce Springsteen, pretty major act, and millennials even still know who that guy is. Neil Young is kind of really popular among the kitschy cool set. In a column, I said he's sort of like a one-person Grateful Dead, and I think that's right. A lot of young people really dig Neil Young. He's always been kind of a counterculture icon, above and beyond his musical works, and I think he's going to be relevant. Neil Young is one of these kind of guys I personally have always thought got too much credit sometimes. He's in everybody's list of, every time Rolling Stone or one of these magazines produces a list of greatest guitar players, Neil Young is always on that list, and people like Larry Carlton and Steve Howe somehow missed that list. I've never understood that, but Neil Young is a brilliant artist. So I think, he'll be relevant in the future. But the one that really jumped out at me was Joni Mitchell. Now, Joni Mitchell is just incredible. I've seen her perform live a few times. She's something else. You probably won't ever get a chance to see Joni Mitchell again now, but I saw her several times in the 70s and 80s with the LA Express, with other artists, and she is just something else. And don't listen to me. Across multiple genres, Joni Mitchell has the admiration and respect of the best musicians in those particular genres. She's played with jazz greats. She's played with pop greats. She's played with rock greats. She's just the goods. Her compositions are just incredible, both lyrically and musically. It's just out of this world how good Joni Mitchell is. And, the fact that I got to see her perform live is one of the I count the high points of my life. She is really, really, really good. And why he drug her into this, again, is something that's just beyond my comprehension. And all of Mr. Slate's bettors know who Joni Mitchell is and know that her legacy is not going anywhere. She is a giant now and will be a giant, I'm quite sure, well down the road. Hell, it's even possible that the Monkees are the artists that everybody's talking about 200 years. Who the hell knows? Nobody knows what's going to be popular 2 centuries from now. My bet is that it might well be somebody that we don't know about right now or don't really know, someone that's considered a minor artist or someone that's completely unknown. Who the heck knows? Furthermore, who the heck cares? Paul Simon is outrageously good. Now, he's a little bit of a twit, and I think that may actually be what's animating this whole thing. There may be some unpleasant history there or something. Paul Simon lives in New York. This guy's in New York. Who knows? He did mention in his column that Simon's known to be mean to younger artists. And you know what? Maybe that's true. I don't know. All I know is that I don't judge people by things like that. I judge people by the quality of their work. I don't have to love you as a human being to appreciate what you did as an artist. And that's the way I feel about almost everybody. If you happen to be a delightful human being on top of that, then I consider that a bonus. But, when you compare Paul Simon and Bob Dylan side by side, I don't know that I think Paul Simon even suffers in that direct comparison. He's been at it longer than Bob Dylan has been by a few years. He has been relevant his entire career, and Dylan's kind of been up and down a little bit. There were some phases where he fell off, and he fell out of favor with his own fans. Hell, when he started playing electric guitar in albums, his own fans were getting ready to lynch him. The fact that he's been able to do that, I think, is a feather in his cap. It's more of an indication of how brilliant Bob Dylan is. But when you try to compare these two musically, you're talking about Dylan, who's a brilliant lyricist, whose palette is about 4 chords wide. He writes these great lyrics. He plays the hell out of 4 chords, and it's great. You talk about Paul Simon, you're talking about a completely different level of harmonic and melodic sophistication. This guy is really good, and he's written some incredible songs. Now, you know, what do I mean by that? I mean in terms of technically proficient musicality. His lyrics are also very good. So, you know, even in a head-to-head comparison, I don't understand where this guy gets off saying one guy is great and the other guy is an also-ran. I'm just not seeing that myself. I don't think most of the public sees that. You know, if you look at any of Spotify or any of these lists and stuff like that, Paul Simon has at least as many, if not more, followers than Bob Dylan does. I just don't know where this guy's coming from, and it's either jealousy or you know, he's whiffing for attention or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, that's about the end of the rant. Saturday afternoon, my kids are going off, so I got to get back upstairs and make sure that they're not choking on their lunch or anything. But the thing that really got to me about this whole Jeff Slate thing is that I have produced artists. I have been an engineer for artists. I have been an artist myself, although not a very good one. I was a much better engineer and producer than I ever was a performer, although I'm trying to remedy that late in life here. The golden rule is speak no ill of other artists. And I actually got that. Someone told me that. You know, I understood at some level always growing up, you know, even when you're in the high school play, you know, how devastating it is when somebody says you suck. So you just don't do that to other people. It's a golden rule kind of a thing. But especially if you're an artist where you're really putting yourself out there. You know, that's why I dislike so many critics. I don't mind critics that get out there and just explain technically this is what's good and this is what's bad about the work. But far too many critics, and Jeff Slate's one of these guys, just take it, they're personal about it. They're just mean. And they not only demean the work, they demean the person behind the work. And that's certainly what Jeff Slate did in this article, and I have no room for that. And in the middle of my career as a producer-engineer, I happened to meet a guy named Steve Isham, who was the keyboard player in Autograph, famous 80s song Turn Up the Radio. We became very good friends. We played on some tracks together, and we hung out a lot together, and I really respected the heck out of this guy. He was a super good human being. And we were in a pub one night having some beers, and we were talking about artists, and I was talking about the use of auto-tune and studio recordio tricks and quantization, all that stuff that was just starting to come along at the beginning of moving from analog to sort of digital musical production. And you know, those of you who know me well have heard my rants on all that kind of stuff. I don't like that. I think it sucks the life out of music, just like too much compression does. And I was talking to Stevie about it. Now, we were talking about some artists who were well known for their use of auto-tune and a lot of these studio tricks, quantizing, you know, performers who don't actually perform live. You'd be amazed at the number of live acts where you're not hearing a single thing that the artist is actually doing live. You know, the jumping up and down on stage and shaking your bum and all the dancing and stuff, that's real. But the musical performance is 64 tracks of Pro Tools following them. And you would be shocked at the people that I know for a fact do that. I've been a part of productions where that was it. All I did as the engineer was turn the volume up and down, and they had everything pre-recorded that was going on. It's just insane. Well, one artist came up, and I won't mention who this artist was, but I just said, yeah, it's really difficult for me to respect that because I just don't think that's musicality. I don't think that's a musical performance. And I'll never forget this. Steve looked right at me, as serious he could be, and he said, Martin, never speak ill of another performer. They've all gone through the same hard times. They're all just doing what they got to do. They created they got fans. They create something, and it may not appeal to you. It may not be up to your standard. You do what you want to do, but leave them alone. Just appreciate them for what they went through to get where they're at. It was like somebody hit me in the head with a brick. It's like, you know what? That's exactly right. Even though this person, this teenage girl that I was talking about, you know, it's difficult to do what she does. It's not like anybody could do that. It takes some talent to do what she does. Does it take as much talent for her to do what she does as it took for Joni Mitchell to do what she did? I don't think so. But it's irrelevant. At some point, she's a performing artist who's putting herself out there, who's creating something for an audience, and that's not something that just anybody can do. So that's been my rule from then on. Speak no ill of other artists. And if you came into my studio, it didn't matter how bad I thought you were. I would just concentrate on the good stuff. I'd figure out the most diplomatic way I could to tell you, maybe we should try this. And every once in a while, when there was no way around it, after they left, I'd play the part myself, which is how I taught myself to play keyboards and occasionally drums. So anyway, that's it. I speak no ill of other artists, I think, is the golden rule when it comes to performing. And Jeff Slate, of course, broke that rule, so he's going to get what he's going to get. The condemnation of that column has been particularly brutal. And, I don't know. I did Jeff Slate the courtesy of looking him up and going through some of his works and looking at some of his performances. The guy's not bad. He's a pretty good artist. Seems to be a decent songwriter. But people don't forget things like this. So I have a feeling on down the road, in addition to the condemnation that he's rightly, in my view, getting right now, at some point down the road, this may absolutely bite him in the behind. We'll have to see. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happened. So anyway, thank you very much for reading the column. I really appreciate those of you who took the time to write me about it and weigh in on it and stuff like that. I was a little surprised that column, of all of them I've written lately, got a lot of traction, but I'm delighted that it did. And I'm also really delighted to understand there are a lot of people out there who feel the same way, that you just don't go around harshing other artists. There are all kinds of people out there whose musical styles do not jibe with my tastes. But that doesn't mean I think they're bad. It just means that it's not to my taste, and there's no accounting for taste. It's all different. The stuff that I like, I don't expect the next person standing in line to like. That's just not the way it works. So anyway, happy Saturday afternoon, and I'll be seeing you.